June 25th, 1906.
New York is melting in the summer heat. Down below, at street level, the air is heavy and foul-smelling. But here, at bird's-eye height, a light breeze blows. We are on the roof of a building that is a symbol of an entire era, the Madison Square Garden Roof Garden. This is the place where the cream of society gathers to drink champagne, watch cheap musicals, and pretend that they are immortal. At the table right by the stage sits the man who built this city, Stanford White. He is 52 years old. He has lush red mustaches, silvered with age, and a reputation as a genius. He designed the Washington Arch. He created this very theater. He defined what American wealth looks like. Those around him look at him with awe, believing that the king of the world is before them. They do not know that there is a hole in the king's pocket. At this very moment, the great architect's debts amount to $700,000. If converted to the exchange rate of 2024, Stanford White owes his creditors $24 million. He is a bankrupt who dines on credit in the building he himself erected. The music plays loudly. The orchestra performs a frivolous little song from the musical Mam'selle Champagne. The song's title sounds like a wicked irony of fate. I could love 1,000,000 girls. White lazily props his head with his hand. He is tired. He does not yet know that he has exactly 30 seconds left to live. A young man makes his way through the crowd of elegantly dressed guests. His face is pale, his eyes wide open and unblinking. This is Harry Kendall Thaw. He is 35 years old, and he is the heir to a railroad empire. At his disposal is a fortune of $40 million, which today would equal $1,300,000,000. But there is a detail that makes the waiters nervously glance around. Despite the sultry June evening, Harry Thaw is dressed in a heavy black wool overcoat over his tuxedo. He is trembling, but not from the cold. Harry approaches the architect's table. He stops 2 meters from Stanford White's face. The architect doesn't even have time to raise his eyes. Harry pulls a .22 caliber revolver from under the flap of his coat. The first shot rings out. The bullet enters Stanford White's left eye. Second shot. The bullet hits the mouth, knocking out teeth. Third shot. The bullet lodges in the shoulder. The roar of the music drowns out the sounds of the shots. The audience laughs. People think it's part of the show, a new special effect to attract attention. Stanford White slowly slides off the chair. His face, which just a minute ago was the face of America's most influential artist, has turned into a bloody mask, unrecognizable even to close friends. Powder burns on the skin indicate how close the killer stood. The great architect falls to the floor of his own creation. He is dead. Harry Thaw does not run. He raises the pistol barrel upward, discharges the remaining bullets, and calmly places the weapon on the table. He turns to the approaching policeman and says the phrase that will enter all textbooks of forensic psychiatry. He ruined my wife. At that moment, chaos erupts in the hall. Women faint, men overturn tables. But this is not just a murder out of jealousy. This is the moment when America lost its innocence. In a pool of blood on the roof of Madison Square Garden, the Gilded Age ended. What happens next will become the first judicial reality show in history. Newspapers will call it the trial of the century, long before the O.J. Simpson case. We will see how $40 million of inheritance are thrown to prove that a rich man has the right to murder. We will see the birth of the term American madness. And at the center of all this will stand a woman, Evelyn Nesbit. The girl whose face was on every postcard, the first supermodel in history, who became a trophy in the war of two men. One of them was a genius who could not control his passions. The other was a madman who could buy any justice. But before we dive into this bloody finale, we need to rewind the tape back. We need to understand where these mad money came from that drove one insane and killed the other. We need to go to Pittsburgh, where amid coal dust and the clatter of railroad wheels, the curse of the Thaw family was born. To understand how one can shoot a man in the face in front of 300 witnesses and consider oneself right, one must go to where the steel of the Thaw family's character was forged. We move from the glittering New York of the early 20th century to mid-19th century Pittsburgh. In those years, this city was called Hell with the lid off. The sky there was black, even at noon, and the white collars of clerks turned gray an hour after stepping out onto the street. It was here, in the smoke and soot, that William Thaw, the father of our future murderer, built the foundation of the cursed empire. William Thaw was a man of a completely different breed than his son. This was a classic patriarch of the era of primitive capital accumulation, carved from the same granite as his tombstone. He did not spend money on actresses and champagne. He earned it with the methodical precision of a steam hammer. William started as a bank clerk, but he had a gift for seeing the future. He understood earlier than others, it doesn't matter what you produce. What matters is how you deliver it. He invested in transportation. First, it was river barges crawling along the muddy waters of the Ohio, then railroads. By 1870, William Thaw had become vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. This was not just a company. It was a state within a state. They owned land, legislators, and the lives of millions of people. Every ton of coal, every steel rail passing through America's industrial veins brought the Thaw clan a fraction of a cent. These fractions of a cent added up to dollars to thousands, and thousands to a fortune that, at the time of the patriarch's death, was valued at $40 million. Converted to modern money, this is more than $1.3 billion. These were money that smelled of oil, coal, and the sweat of thousands of workers burning in the furnaces of industrialization. William Thaw was a stern Presbyterian. His life was subordinated to a strict schedule and accounting books. But in this perfectly constructed financial fortress, there was one fatal vulnerability. In 1871, when William was already over 50, his second wife, Mary Copley Thaw, gave birth to a son. He was named Harry Kendall Thaw. Mary Copley Thaw is a key figure in our tragedy, the gray eminence of the catastrophe. If the father was the law, then the mother was the chaos that eroded that law. From the very beginning, she decided that her little Harry was special. And he really was special, but in the medical sense of the word. From early childhood, the boy showed signs of what psychiatrists of that time called moral imbecility, and modern doctors would diagnose as paranoid schizophrenia aggravated by narcissistic disorder. Harry grew up in a mansion called Lyndhurst, towering over the smoky city. While the father built railroads, the son learned to destroy. History has preserved the reports of nannies and governesses who fled the Thaw house. Little Harry would throw tantrums that burst blood vessels in his eyes. He could scream for hours until he got what he wanted. At school, he was an outcast. He was expelled from private boarding schools with alarming regularity, but each time Mary Thaw would pull out her checkbook, write a sum with 3 zeros for the school's needs, and Harry would be returned to his desk. Thus, he learned the first and most important lesson of his life. There is no problem that cannot be solved if you throw enough money at it. The father saw this. Old William Thaw was no fool. He looked at his heir and saw not a continuer of the dynasty, but a time bomb. Harry enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh. They expelled him. He enrolled at Harvard. They dismissed him. He could not concentrate on anything except his own pleasures. Already in his youth, he began spending money at such a speed as if he were trying to burn it. Family documents have preserved evidence of how William tried to rein in his son. He cut his allowance. He tried to make him work. But every time the father closed the door in the face of the prodigal son, the mother opened a window and handed him a wad of bills. This was a war of upbringing within one family. The father's stern realism against the mother's blind, suffocating love. The culmination of this stage came in 1889. William Thaw died. In his last days of life, dictating his will, he made a desperate attempt to save the family from ruin and his son from himself. The will clearly stated, Harry Kendall Thaw should not have immediate access to the entire capital. He was entitled only to a modest monthly allowance, which would be controlled by the executors. The old magnate knew that if you gave this boy millions, disaster would strike. He was right. But he did not account for one factor: his widow. As soon as the coffin with William's body was lowered into the ground, Mary Thaw began dismantling all the safeguards her husband had put in place. She was the richest widow in Pittsburgh, and she decided that her beloved Harry should want for nothing. She increased his allowance to $80,000 a year. So you understand the scale. The average worker in America at that time earned about $500 a year. Harry received 160 times more, just for breathing. The father's death was not a tragedy for Harry, but a liberation. The restraining factor was gone. The 19-year-old boy, in whose head a chemical storm of illness raged and in whose pockets millions burned, stepped out into the big world. Pittsburgh had become too cramped for him. The lights of New York, the glamour of Broadway, and available women beckoned him. The empire built on coal and steel now worked to sustain one man's darkest fantasies. Steam hammers pounded, trains hauled cargo, workers swallowed dust in Pennsylvania mines just so that Harry Thaw could buy diamonds for dancers and light cigars with $100 bills. The mechanism for pumping national wealth into personal madness was set in motion. Harry set off to conquer high society, armed only with his family name and checkbook. He did not yet know that in New York there are things that cannot be bought, and people who cannot be intimidated. He was heading toward his fate, and in his suitcase, among the silk shirts, there already lay the metaphorical revolver that one day would fire on the roof of Madison Square Garden. But for now, he was just the Pittsburgh Kid, a rich heir whom people laughed at behind his back, but bowed to in his face. The Gilded Age was preparing to embrace its ugliest child. New York at the beginning of the 20th century did not just shine, it dazzled. It was a time when electricity had just been tamed, and the city at night turned into an ocean of artificial light in which the stars drowned. It was the era that Mark Twain dubbed the Gilded Age with biting precision. Not golden, mind you, but gilded. The thinnest layer of gold leaf over rusty iron, rotten wood, and human vices. And in this theater of the absurd, where the sets cost more than human lives, Harry Thaw and Stanford White played the leading roles. When Harry Thaw arrived in New York, he landed in the epicenter of an arms race in luxury. The first generation of heirs, the sons of those very coal barons and railroad kings, had gone on the hunt. Their fathers, like old William Thaw, wore the same suits for years, and knew the value of every cent. Their children knew the price of nothing but the cost of everything. It was a generation that did not build, but consumed. Stanford White, our future victim, was the architect of this bacchanalia, in the literal and figurative sense. It was he who built the sets for the life of American elites. He designed country clubs in Newport, palaces on Fifth Avenue, and that very Washington Arch through which millionaires' carriages triumphantly passed. White was more than an architect. He was the arbiter of taste. If Stanford White said that this season it was fashionable to drink champagne from crystal of a certain cut, all of New York obeyed. He was a tall, red-haired, charismatic giant who lived large even when his pockets were empty. Harry Thaw hated him, and this hatred was steeped in the bitterest envy. Harry, with his millions and the manners of a spoiled child, desperately wanted to become one of high society. He wanted to be a member of the prestigious Knickerbocker Club. He wanted to be invited to the Astor's balls. But doors closed in his face. New York's upper crust had a nose for madness and vulgarity. Harry was too loud, too strange, too aggressive. He tried to buy friendship by handing out diamond-studded cigarette cases to random acquaintances in bars, but he got only scornful smirks behind his back. They called him the Pittsburgh upstart. In response, Harry created his own world, the world of the Lobster Palace Society. That's what they called Broadway's night restaurants, like Rector's or Delmonico's, where champagne flowed like a river until dawn, and morality was left in the coat check along with the overcoats. Here, Harry was king. He started the fashion of lighting cigars with $100 bills, a gesture that today seems like a vulgar cliché from movies, but back then it was a real demonstration of power. Converted to modern money, he was burning about $3,500 per cigar. He could order a dinner for 50 people, even if dining alone, just to have the room empty. Waiters fought for the right to serve his table because Harry's tips often exceeded their annual salary. But behind this glitter lurked rot. Medical records from that era, if published, would shock us. Syphilis was the occupational disease of the aristocracy, and cocaine was sold in pharmacies as a remedy for toothache. Harry Thaw was not just a spoiled rich kid, he was a drug addict. His brainstorms were amplified by a mixture of alcohol and morphine. He plunged into a whirlpool of debauchery that frightened even the hardened Broadway impresarios. On the other side of the barricades stood Stanford White. If Harry was a vulgar consumer, White was a refined predator. He had a secret apartment at 22 West 24th Street. From the outside, an unremarkable building, inside, Aladdin's cave, filled with Persian rugs, Japanese screens, and antiques. The center of this apartment was a room with mirrored walls and the famous red velvet swings suspended from the ceiling. It was here that the great architect entertained young chorus girls whom he called his goddaughters. The difference between these two men was fundamental. White seduced women with his charm, status, and promise of fame. He was a genius, and girls were drawn to his light, often burning up in it. Harry Thaw bought women, or took them by force. He hated White not because he was a debauchee, but because White did it with an ease and style that were inaccessible to Harry, no matter how much money he threw at it. This was a time when New York lived a double life. By day, it was a city of progress, skyscrapers, and Puritan morality. At night, when the lights of Broadway came on, the city turned into Babylon. Girls from poor families, dreaming of the stage, became expendable material in the games of millionaires. They were called Florodora girls or Gibson girls. Their faces looked out from candy boxes and advertising posters. They were America's first pop stars. But their fates were decided not on the stage, but in the private rooms of restaurants, where men like Thaw and White made deals.
By 1901, the tension in this closed circle had reached its limit. Harry Thaw spent $80,000 a year, almost $3 million in modern money, on entertainment, but felt lonely and rejected. Stanford White, mired in debt, continued to live like a prince of the blood, balancing on the edge of bankruptcy. They moved in the same orbits, attended the same premieres, slept with the same women. A collision was inevitable. And the catalyst for this collision was a girl whose beauty was so perfect that it seemed unreal. Her name was Evelyn Nesbit. She was only 16 years old. She came from Pittsburgh, like Harry, but not in a private train car, but in coach class, with her mother, who didn't have money even for lunch. Evelyn became the spark that fell into the barrel of gunpowder accumulated by years of mad spending, secret vices, and male vanity. The Gilded Age was ready to crack, and the crack was to run through the heart of this young model. Stanford White noticed her first, but Harry Thaw was already watching from the shadows, and his hand reached for his checkbook to buy the one thing that belonged to White: his muse. A war was beginning, not for love, but for ownership. In New York of the 1900s, there existed a front line more rigid and impassable than any military fortifications in Europe. It was not marked on maps, but everyone who owned a fortune knew its coordinates. This line ran right across the threshold of Mrs. Carolyn Astor's ballroom on Fifth Avenue. This hall held exactly 400 people, hence the term the 400, the list of the elect, compiled by Ward McAllister. If you were on this list, you existed. If not, you were just a rich ghost with a checkbook. For Harry Thaw, this became the main tragedy of his life. He possessed a fortune surpassing the capital of most people on the 400 list. But for New York's elite, he remained that guy from Pittsburgh. In the eyes of the old aristocracy, the Vanderbilts, Astors, Roosevelts, money was divided into old and new. Old money smelled of lavender, history, and land rent. New money, like Thaw's, smelled of coal, sweat, and vulgarity. Harry decided to storm this bastion. His tactic was simple and aggressive: financial bombardment. He threw parties whose budget exceeded the annual income of a small American town. At one dinner in Sherry's restaurant, each guest found under the napkin a compliment from the host, a piece of jewelry worth hundreds of dollars wrapped in a $50 bill. To understand the scale, $50 back then was a worker's 2-month salary. Harry used banknotes as wrapping paper, but instead of admiration, this caused disgust. The New York Times and society chroniclers of that time described these antics with barely concealed contempt. Harry Thaw was too loud. He sweated too much. He wanted to please too desperately. In high society, there is an unwritten rule. You can be eccentric only if your lineage is impeccable. If you're a nouveau riche, your eccentricity is seen as a diagnosis. The most painful blow for Harry was the story with the Knickerbocker Club. It was the holy grail of New York's male community. Membership there guaranteed gentleman status. Harry Thaw applied for membership several times, and each time he got the black ball. The voting procedure was anonymous. Club members dropped white or black balls into a box. One black ball was enough to block a candidate. In Harry's case, the box was as black as his father's coal. The irony that drove Harry mad was that Stanford White was the soul of this club. White was not fabulously rich by Thaw's standards. He was just an architect, a hired worker who built houses for the rich. But White had what couldn't be bought: charisma.
taste, and lineage. He was adored. He entered the Astors' drawing rooms without knocking, drank cognac with the Morgans, and dictated fashion to all of America. For Harry, this was incomprehensible. Why this red-haired debauchee, mired in debt, was the king of the city, while he, Harry Thaw, heir to 40 million, stood at closed doors. This confrontation grew into a real architectural war. Harry tried to compensate for his social inferiority with square footage. He rented the most expensive suites in hotels, entire floors in Europe, traveling with a retinue of sycophants, servants, and doctors. He behaved like a medieval monarch in exile. But there was one trophy that could become a pass to the world of the elect, or, at least, a way to humiliate the king of that world. This trophy was Evelyn Nesbit. In Harry Thaw's mind, Evelyn became the symbol of everything Stanford White had stolen from him. White discovered her. White made her famous. White, like Pygmalion, sculpted an icon of style from a simple girl, and then, taking advantage of her naivety, and, to be honest, getting her drunk on champagne, took her virginity in that very mirrored room. For society, it was an open secret, but for Harry Thaw, it became an obsession. He decided to save Evelyn, but his salvation was perverted. He began courting her not like a lovesick youth, but like a collector who wants to buy a rare painting from a rival to then burn it or hang it in a dark closet. Harry began instilling in Evelyn that she was defiled, that White was a monster who had ruined her life. This social war reached its apogee during the trip to Europe. Harry took Evelyn and her mother to the old world, trying to portray himself as a noble knight. They stayed in the best hotels in Paris and London. Harry showered her with gifts, but each gift came with a catch. He demanded from her detailed, minute-by-minute accounts of what exactly Stanford White did to her. This was not jealousy. It was voyeurism mixed with hatred. It was in Europe, in a castle in the Austrian Tyrol, that the mask of the noble heir finally fell off. Harry locked Evelyn in a room, undressed her, and brutally beat her with a dog whip. The blood on her white skin brought him to ecstasy. Between blows, he did not shout at her. He shouted at Stanford White. He was punishing her flesh for the architect's sins. Evelyn survived, but her will was broken. She realized the terrible truth. In the world of big money, she had no protection. Stanford White used her for pleasure and discarded her when she bored him. Harry Thaw used her as a tool of revenge and an object of ownership. She was just a pawn in the battle of two egos, one of which was genius, the other, madness. Returning to New York, Harry Thaw realized that the social doors before him were closed forever. The Knickerbocker Club would never accept him. Mrs. Astor would never send an invitation. He had lost the social war. Money hadn't worked. He had only one path left to make this snobbish world notice him and shudder. He needed to commit an act so loud that even the walls of the 400 ballroom would tremble. Harry decided to buy himself the most expensive title in the world, the title of Defender of American Womanhood. To do this, he needed to marry the fallen Evelyn and kill the dragon White. Thus, the social drama began turning into a bloody thriller. While Harry Thaw waged his personal war in New York, something was happening on the transatlantic marriage market that historians would later call the greatest social barter in history. This was the heyday of the dollar princesses era. The scheme was cynical and flawless. American coal and railroad barons had mountains of money, but no class. European aristocrats had millennial coats of arms and castles, but their roofs leaked, and the wine in their cellars was running out. The deal was simple: millions of dollars in exchange for a title. Consuelo Vanderbilt married the Duke of Marlborough, bringing him a dowry that today would be valued at $75 million. Her father essentially sold his daughter so that a real duke would appear in the family. Consuelo sobbed at the altar, while the Duke looked at her like a check that could finally be cashed. Harry Thaw, as always, perverted this trend. He too planned to buy himself a wife, but his deal was inverted. He wasn't seeking a title to launder his dirty coal money. He was seeking a fallen angel to launder his reputation. He needed Evelyn Nesbit not as a trophy for society salons, but as living proof of Stanford White's crimes. On April 4th, 1905, a wedding took place in Pittsburgh that sealed this fatal union. It was not a celebration of love. It was the signing of an ownership contract. By that time, Evelyn was backed into a corner. Stanford White had long lost interest in her, switching to new, younger goddaughters. A modeling career couldn't last forever, and the reputation of a ruined woman closed the doors of respectable homes to her. She had no money to support her mother and family. Harry Thaw, like an experienced predator, sensed this smell of desperation. He offered her a deal: full financial support, a luxurious life, and the status of a millionaire's lawful wife. In return, she had to give him not only her body, but also her memory. Before the wedding, Harry forced Evelyn to do something monstrous. He demanded that she describe in writing, in the minutest anatomical details, everything that Stanford White had done to her. How exactly he got her drunk, how he undressed her, what happened in the mirrored room. Evelyn wrote these confessions to dictation while Harry paced the room, becoming aroused by every word. This was not a marriage contract. It was an indictment that Harry planned to carry in his breast pocket as justification for the future murder. The ceremony itself, in Pittsburgh's Third Presbyterian Church, was grim. The bride had traded her airy Gibson girl outfits for a strict black traveling suit. It looked like mourning for her own youth. Harry's mother, the domineering Mary Thaw, gave her reluctant consent to this marriage. She understood. Better that her son marry this actress and settle down than continue his escapades in European brothels. She hoped that marriage would become a straitjacket for her mad son. What a fatal mistake. For Harry Thaw, the ring on Evelyn's finger meant a change in legal status. Now she was no longer just White's former mistress. Now she was Mrs. Harry Kendall Thaw. And that meant that any past actions by White toward her were now interpreted by Harry as an insult to the honor of the Thaw family. According to Harry's perverted logic and that very dementia Americana, Stanford White had not just seduced a girl, he had posthumously defiled Harry Thaw's bed. Immediately after the wedding, they settled in the family estate Lyndhurst. Evelyn found herself in a golden cage. She was forbidden to model. She was forbidden to see her old friends. The Thaw household servants, well-trained and silent, watched her every move. She lived in luxury that 99% of Americans dreamed of. But in the evenings, when the bedroom doors closed, she was left alone with a man who kept a revolver under his pillow and forced her to retell the story of her fall again and again. Harry began a paranoid campaign. He hired private detectives to follow Stanford White. He spent thousands of dollars to gather dirt on the architect. He went to Anthony Comstock, the famous morality crusader, and tried to convince him to launch a crusade against White. But society did not want to listen. White was the public's favorite, a genius who built Madison Square Garden. Who would believe a mad millionaire from Pittsburgh? It was then, in the first months of marriage, that the thought fully formed in Harry's inflamed brain. The law is powerless. Money is powerless. Social connections are powerless. The only way to cleanse Evelyn and restore justice is the physical elimination of the source of contamination. The deal was sealed. Evelyn got money and safety, but lost freedom. Harry got a living doll and a motive for murder. The Gilded Age, which loved beautiful facades so much, got its most terrible secret hidden behind bedroom doors. The world saw a beautiful couple, the heir to an empire and America's most beautiful woman, strolling down Fifth Avenue. Newspaper writers described Evelyn's outfits, costing over $5,000. But no one saw the bruises under those outfits, and did not know that in the pocket of Harry Thaw's elegant overcoat, there already lay a list of the architect's deadly sins, which would soon be read not in church, but amid the roar of gunshots. If Stanford White created architecture of light and air, then the Thaw family home was a monument to weight, coal, and suppression. Welcome to Lyndhurst, the family nest in Pittsburgh, which became for Evelyn Nesbit not a palace, but the most expensive correctional institution in the world. This estate stood on a hill, towering over the smoky city like a feudal castle. To understand the psychology of the murderer, one must walk the corridors of the house where he grew up. The building was constructed from dark sandstone, which over time absorbed the city's soot, becoming almost black. This was architecture meant not to delight, but to intimidate. Walls a meter thick, narrow slit windows, and massive oak doors that opened with a heavy, drawn-out groan. Inside reigned the atmosphere of a museum where breathing was forbidden. The floors were covered with Persian carpets so thick that footsteps sank into them soundlessly. Furniture imported from Europe stood in dust covers, as if awaiting a visit from royalty that would never come. In the dining room hung a rock crystal chandelier weighing half a ton, a Damoclean sword hovering over every family dinner. This house was a living organism serviced by an invisible army. The staff numbered dozens of people, but seeing them was considered bad form. They moved through a system of secret corridors and back stairs, appearing only when the bell rang. The butlers in the Thaw family knew more secrets than priests in confession. They knew how to wash blood from shirts, how to discreetly dispose of empty laudanum bottles, and how to look through their masters when they threw tantrums. A special place in this hierarchy was occupied by Evelyn's maids. One of them was Emma Kislick, a woman whose testimony would later shed light on this hell. Her job was not only to fasten the endless hooks on her mistress's dresses, she was a jailer. The servant's duties included reporting to Harry's mother, Mary Thaw, on every step of the young bride. Where she looked, whom she wrote letters to, what she cried about at night. Life in Lyndhurst followed an absurd, ritual schedule. Breakfast was served exactly at 8 a.m. on a silver service worth $50,000 at the time's rate. The food was heavy, abundant, and tasteless, just like the atmosphere of the house itself. At the table, a deathly silence often reigned, broken only by the clink of cutlery against porcelain. It was a symphony of loneliness. People who possessed a fortune capable of feeding a small state could not find a single warm word for each other. For Evelyn, accustomed to the bohemian chaos of White's studio, to the smell of turpentine, flowers, and champagne, this house became a tomb. There was no music here, except Presbyterian hymns. There was no laughter, because laughter was considered a sign of frivolity. In the vast halls with ceilings 6 meters high, she felt tiny and crushed. Harry's rooms were a separate state within this gloomy kingdom. If the rest of the house was a temple of primness, the heir's quarters were a warehouse of his manias. Here were stored collections of pornographic postcards, whips hidden in drawers with false bottoms, and medical reference books in which he underlined the symptoms of his imaginary illnesses. Harry could stay in his room for days, demanding that food be left at the door. The servants whispered that they heard him talking to himself, rehearsing accusatory speeches against his enemies. The house emphasized and amplified the madness of its inhabitants. There was so much space that people lost connection with each other. One could live in Lyndhurst for a month and never once encounter other family members in the corridors. This architectural solitude corroded the psyche. Evelyn sat by the window for hours, gazing at the smoke from factory chimneys, and realized that she had traded her freedom and body for a golden cage, the key to which lay in the pocket of a madman. It was here, in the silence of the library paneled with mahogany, that Harry Thaw finally formulated his plan. The walls of this house heard him read aloud Evelyn's written confession, savoring every word of humiliation. The grandeur of the interiors convinced him of his own chosenness. A man living in such surroundings cannot be wrong. He, a lord dispensing justice. Lyndhurst became an incubator of tragedy. The cold stone of the walls cooled Harry's heart, while the richness of the interiors gave him a false sense of impunity. When they left this gloomy castle to embark on the fateful trip to New York, they brought not only Louis Vuitton luggage, but also a clot of that dark, suffocating energy which this house had accumulated. The architecture of power did its work. It turned a man into a monster convinced of his divine right to kill. By June of 1906, Harry Thaw and Evelyn Nesbit returned to New York. To an outside observer, it was the triumphant return of a prince and princess. They stayed in the best hotels, dined at Delmonico's, and their appearance elicited whispers of admiration. But if we could look at them through an X-ray machine of truth, we would see not shine, but the terminal stage of decay. The rot that originated in Pittsburgh now devoured them from within. Harry Thaw was in a state that doctors of that time delicately called nervous exhaustion. But in the language of facts, it was the severest cocaine psychosis. In the early 20th century, cocaine was not considered a club drug. It was a legal medicine, sold in pharmacies as a tonic. Harry consumed it on an industrial scale. The white powder became fuel for his paranoia. He imagined that hired killers lurked around every corner. In his inflamed brain, a conspiracy theory worthy of a spy novel was born. Harry was convinced that Stanford White, this paunchy 50-year-old architect, had hired the famous Monk Eastman's gang, the most hardened gangsters of New York, to kill him, Harry. This was absolute lies. White at that time couldn't even hire a cab without going into debt, let alone killers. But for Harry, the threat was real. That's why, in 30-degree heat, he began wearing a heavy woolen overcoat. He believed that the thick fabric could cushion a knife thrust or bullet. Under the coat, closer to his heart, there always lay a loaded revolver. While Harry was going mad from fear, his victim, Stanford White, was slowly dying from reality. The life of the great architect was falling apart at the seams. His health had been undermined by years of excesses. His liver was rebelling, his kidneys failing. But worse than the physical pain was the financial pain. By the summer of 1906, White's debts had reached the astronomical sum of $700,000. Converted to modern money, that is $24 million. Imagine this contrast. The man who built America's most luxurious buildings, who created the facade of imperial grandeur for the USA, was himself bankrupt. His paintings, tapestries, and antiques were pawned and repawned. He ran from creditors, borrowing from some friends to pay others. The brilliant society lion had turned into a hunted beast. He sought solace in his usual vice, young girls, but even that no longer brought joy, only adding more dirt to his reputation. And between these two drowning men was Evelyn. Her state can be described in one word: stupor. She had turned into a living mannequin. Harry controlled every second of her life. He forbade her to smile at men. If she lingered her gaze on a waiter for more than 2 seconds, an interrogation followed that evening in the hotel room, which could last until morning. Evelyn began to drink. Champagne became her anesthesia. She knew that Harry carried a weapon. She had seen how his eyes changed when the brainstorm came. His pupils dilated so much that the iris disappeared, turning his eyes into 2 black holes. In those moments, he spoke of himself in the third person and called himself the instrument of providence. Evelyn understood that the explosion was inevitable, but she was too broken to run. In mid-June, an event occurred that became the last straw. Harry and Evelyn accidentally encountered Stanford White in a restaurant. The architect didn't even look their way. He simply passed by, lost in his grim thoughts about debts. But Harry interpreted it differently.
For him, it was diabolical arrogance. He saw mockery in the old man's tired gaze.
"He's laughing at us," Harry hissed, gripping the fork so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "This debauchee thinks he can get away with everything." From that moment, the countdown began. Harry stopped sleeping. He paced the hotel room from corner to corner, muttering curses. He wrote a will. This is an important legal fact. The murder was not a spontaneous act of passion, as the lawyers would later claim. Harry was preparing for the fact that after the act of justice, he would either die or go to prison. He distributed his millions, leaving part to Evelyn, but with the condition: if she ever returned to her previous life, she would not get a cent. Even from beyond the grave, he planned to control her. The atmosphere in New York was heating up, along with the air temperature. The city was suffocating. Asphalt was melting. In the mansions of Fifth Avenue, they closed the shutters, trying to preserve coolness, but the rot seeped through marble and velvet. High society continued to dance on the deck of the sinking ship of morality. Newspapers wrote about balls and premieres, not noticing that in the pocket of one of the heirs lay a pistol that would put a period to this era. On Monday, the 25th of June, Harry woke up surprisingly calm. The storm in his head had subsided, giving way to icy clarity. He had made a decision. The rot must be burned out. He put on a tuxedo, threw on his heavy, absurd overcoat, and told Evelyn that they were going to the theater that evening. "To the roof?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, "where it's cool." They were heading towards Stanford White, who at that moment was perhaps tallying his debts, unaware that his main creditor was not a bank, but the mad husband of his former mistress, and payment would be taken not in money, but in lead. The rot had eaten away the foundation, and the building was ready to collapse. The evening of the 25th of June, 1906, began not with shots, but with dinner. Harry Thaw and Evelyn Nesbit went to Café Martin, a fashionable establishment on Fifth Avenue. Fate, like an experienced playwright, brought all the participants of the tragedy together at one point, even before the finale. When Harry and Evelyn entered the hall, they ran into Stanford White. The great architect was dining with his son. It was a silent scene. White looked tired, his face haggard under the weight of financial problems. He did not know that he was seeing his murderer for the last time before he pulled the trigger. Harry Thaw froze. In his head, poisoned by cocaine and paranoia, this chance encounter turned into a sign from above. "The beast is here," he whispered. They left the restaurant and headed to Madison Square Garden. The elevator took them to the roof, to that very garden designed by White. It was around 11 o'clock in the evening. The heat had somewhat subsided, giving way to the sultry New York night. On stage was the performance of Mam'zelle Champagne. It was a light, silly show with girls dancing the can-can and simple verses. The audience, consisting of rich idlers, drank wine and fanned themselves with fans. Harry Thaw was like a taut string. He couldn't sit still. He would stand up, then sit down, then wander aimlessly between the tables. His heavy black overcoat looked like a ridiculous blot amid the white summer suits and low-cut dresses. Evelyn sat at the table, numb from the premonition of disaster. She knew this look of her husband. It was the look of a man who had already crossed the line of reality. At that moment, Stanford White entered the hall. He was alone. He walked to a table not far from the stage, sat down, and propped his head with his hand. It was the pose of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was staring into emptiness. Only minutes remained until the end of his life. Harry Thaw saw him. He made a circle around the hall, like a shark narrowing circles around its prey. He approached White's table. The distance between them was less than a meter. The music on stage reached a crescendo. The chorus sang, "I could love 1,000,000 girls." Harry drew a gold-plated .22 caliber revolver. He didn't hesitate. There were no shouts, no warnings, no dueling code. This was an execution. The first shot sounded like the pop of a champagne cork. The bullet entered the architect's left eye, instantly destroying the brain. Stanford White died before his body even realized it. The second shot hit the mouth, shattering teeth and exiting through the back of the head. The third shot struck the shoulder as the body was already sliding to the floor. Time stopped. For a second, a silence hung in the vast hall, broken only by the cheerful orchestra music. The musicians hadn't yet realized what had happened and continued playing. Then someone screamed. That scream tore through the stupor. People jumped from their seats. Tables fell, glasses shattered. Women in panic trampled the hems of their expensive dresses, trying to flee from the source of the sound. Harry Thaw stood over the body of his defeated enemy. He didn't try to run. He raised the revolver barrel upward, a gesture that would later be called the madman's salute. A strange, frightening smile of relief was on his face. A firefighter on duty in the theater ran up to him and snatched the weapon. Harry didn't resist. "He ruined my life," Harry said loudly, addressing the crowd. "I did it for my wife." Evelyn Nesbit, hearing the shots, froze. Harry approached her, already held by the police. He leaned toward her and, as if nothing had happened, asked, "All right, dear?" "I think I killed him." Evelyn looked at him with eyes wide with horror and uttered the phrase that would become the headline of all morning newspapers. "My God, Harry, what have you done?" The body of Stanford White lay on the floor of the very building that made him famous. The blood of the great architect spread across the parquet, mixing with spilled wine. His face, which that morning had been the face of America's cultural idol, turned into a bloody mess. The medics who arrived covered him with a tablecloth from the nearest table. It was a symbolic shroud. The architect of luxury was covered with a symbol of luxurious consumption. The police led Harry Thaw out through the back door to save him from the crowd, which wavered between horror and bloodthirsty curiosity. When they put him in the police van, he looked like a man who had just completed a heavy but necessary job. He believed that society would applaud him. In his distorted reality, he was St. George, who had slain the dragon. That night, New York did not sleep. Telegraph machines in newspaper offices glowed red hot. The news of Stanford White's murder spread around the world at the speed of an electric impulse. This was not just a murder. This was the downfall of society's pillars. The richest heir killed the most famous artist because of the most beautiful woman. For the Thaw family, this became the beginning of the end. Harry's mother, Mary Thaw, upon learning of what happened, did not faint. She immediately called in a team of lawyers. She understood. Now the battle would begin not for her son's life, they wouldn't hang him with that much money, but for reputation and wallet. For the White family, this was a catastrophe. They lost a father, husband, and breadwinner, and in the morning learned that he left them only debts and a scandal that would haunt them for decades. But the most terrible transformation happened to Evelyn. In that second when the last shot rang out, she realized that her life, as she knew it, was over. She was no longer a model or a millionaire's wife. She became the chief witness and cause of the crime of the century. The golden cage that Harry had built slammed shut, and the key was thrown into the pool of blood on the roof of Madison Square Garden. America's era of innocence ended to the sounds of vaudeville and the smell of gunpowder. After the smoke from the shots on the roof of Madison Square Garden cleared, an equally brutal battle began. Only now they shot not with bullets, but with lawsuits, and the blood in this slaughter was money. The phase had arrived that could be called the mathematics of the curse. The empire built on coal and steel by old William Thaw began to melt rapidly in the hands of lawyers, psychiatrists, and blackmailers. The trial of Harry Thaw became the first reality show in human history.
Harry's mother, the Iron Lady Mary Thaw, threw the entire family arsenal into saving her son. She hired Delphin Delmas, America's most expensive lawyer, nicknamed the Napoleon of the California bar. His fee was astronomical. In total, Harry's defense cost the family $1 million of that time. If converted to the exchange rate of 2024, the amount comes to about $35 million. $35 million to prove that shooting a man at point-blank range was not a crime, but an act of patriotism and defense of the family hearth. And they won. The jury, hypnotized by Evelyn's story of Stanford White's debauchery and the new legal concept of American madness, found Harry not guilty by reason of insanity. He was sent not to the electric chair, but to the Matawan Hospital for the criminally insane. But for the Thaw family, this was a Pyrrhic victory. The financial hemorrhage did not stop. In the psychiatric clinic, Harry lived not like a patient, but like a resort guest. He bought out an entire floor, hired personal chefs, and even ordered deliveries of delicacies from New York's best restaurants. He spent money with the same fury as he had once bought antiques, but now these expenditures looked pathetic. It was luxury in a padded cell. While Harry enjoyed comfortable madness, his victim underwent final humiliation.
Stanford White's death exposed his financial catastrophe. The great architect left behind not a fortune, but a debt pit $700,000 deep. To pay off the creditors, his widow was forced to hold a grand sale. The auction of White's possessions became the symbolic end of the Gilded Age. Everything went under the hammer. 15th century Italian tapestries, against the backdrop of which he seduced young girls, sold for a song.
Rare statues, marble columns, old masters' paintings, everything that made up the soul of his famous interiors was picked apart, piece by nouveau riche who, during White's lifetime, wouldn't have dared even dream of an invitation to his home. It was like looting a battlefield. Things collected by a genius with impeccable taste now adorned the living rooms of meat kings and stock speculators who didn't understand their true value. But the most terrible fate awaited Evelyn Nesbit. She fulfilled her role. At the trial, she humiliated herself before the whole world, recounting the intimate details of her affair with White to save her husband. She expected gratitude. She expected the promised million. Instead, she received a divorce and complete cut-off from the Thor money trough. As soon as Harry was declared insane and avoided the gallows, the Thor family threw Evelyn out like a used napkin. She was assigned a humiliatingly small allowance, barely enough to live on. Harry's mother declared that Evelyn was a tainted woman, unworthy of bearing their name. She, whose face once adorned every display window in America, now had to scrape by to survive. Evelyn gave birth to a son, Russell Thor, whom the press immediately dubbed the $1 million baby. Harry Thor categorically denied paternity, claiming that in the hospital he could not have conceived a child, although witnesses spoke of his frequent conjugal visits with his wife during that period. The boy grew up the spitting image of Harry, but received not a cent of inheritance from the Thor empire. This was the madman's final revenge, to disown his own flesh and blood in order to preserve the money. Evelyn's fall was long and agonizing. She tried to return to the stage, but now the audience came to see not a talented actress, but the murderer's wife. She performed in cheap vaudevilles, danced in smoke-filled clubs in Atlantic City, traded on her past because she had nothing else left. She survived several suicide attempts, struggled with morphine addiction and alcoholism. The woman over whom people killed and died ended up teaching ceramics molding in a California college, trying to forget her own name. And what about Harry? In 1915, he escaped from the sanatorium, just walked out through the gates, which were probably opened by the golden key of a bribe. Later, he was declared sane and released. But this was no longer the Pittsburgh Kid. This was an aging, spiteful sadist whom society had finally rejected. The money was running out. The Great Depression of the 30s dealt a crushing blow to the remnants of the Thaw fortune. Railroads stopped bringing super profits. Coal got cheaper. Harry Thaw died slowly, turning into a caricature of himself. He continued to litigate, scandalize, and beat people. In the 20s, he was accused of brutally beating a teenage boy, which confirmed prison and hospital had not reformed him. By the time of Harry Thaw's death in 1947, only a memory remained of the 40 million. Mansions were sold or demolished. The famous Lyndhurst Palace in Pittsburgh was decaying. Furniture that remembered the grandeur of coal kings rotted in warehouses. History came full circle. Wealth that seemed unshakable evaporated. Palaces built for centuries went under demolition. People who considered themselves masters of life turned to dust. The gilding peeled off, revealing rust. This was the end of the era when money could do anything, but couldn't save anyone.
The great sale ended. The lots were sold, but none of the buyers became happier. A new era was dawning, the era of glass and concrete, in which there was no place for velvet swings, duels of honor, and mad heirs in heavy overcoats. But the echo of those shots still resounded, reminding that the price of wealth is sometimes measured not in dollars, but in souls. If you go today to the corner of 26th Street and Madison Avenue in New York, you won't find the roof garden there. You won't hear shots or see ghosts in tuxedos. In 1925, just 19 years after the murder, Stanford White's masterpiece, Madison Square Garden, was ruthlessly demolished. The building for which he lived and in which he died turned into a pile of broken bricks, making way for the New York life-building skyscraper. It seems like fate's final mockery. The crime scene was erased from the face of the earth, as if the city wanted to forget its shame. But if we look deeper, we will see the paradox we spoke about at the very beginning. Harry Thaw pulled the trigger to destroy Stanford White, to erase him from memory and history. He spent millions to prove his superiority. But time, the most honest and cruel judge, rendered its verdict. And this verdict is not in favor of money. Harry Kendall Thaw, today, is just a footnote in forensic psychiatry and criminology textbooks. His name comes up only in the context of his victim, of his $40 million, of his coal empire, of his estates. Nothing remains except yellowed court records. He wanted to buy immortality at the price of murder, but bought only eternal oblivion. No one names streets after him. No one admires his life. He remained in history as that madman in the overcoat. Stanford White, on the contrary, won this war from the grave. You cannot walk through Manhattan without encountering his legacy. The Washington Arch in Greenwich Village, through which millions of tourists pass, is his work. Libraries, clubs, churches, the physical body of New York, its imperial style, its gilded splendor, all this was created by the hands of the man who died bankrupt. White's debts were written off, but his art remained. He proved that stone is stronger than gold, and talent lives longer than madness. And what about Evelyn? The girl on the red velvet swings became the progenitor of modern celebrity culture. Look at today's Instagram stars, at Kim Kardashian, or models whose names are known only thanks to scandals. Evelyn Nesbit was the first in this line. She was the first woman who understood that beauty is currency, but this currency is subject to monstrous inflation. Her face still looks at us from antique postcards, and in her eyes we see the same tragedy as in Marilyn Monroe's half a century later. She died in 1967 in a nursing home in California, teaching others the art of sculpture, the irony being that at the end of her life, she herself became a creator, ceasing to be just a muse. But the most surprising echo of this story resounded in the fate of her son, Russell Thaw, the very boy from whom Harry Thaw disowned, claiming he couldn't have conceived him in the insane asylum. Russell grew up bearing the surname of the man who hated him, and he became the complete opposite of his legal father. Russell Thaw became one of the most outstanding test pilots of World War II. He piloted bombers, risked his life for the country, worked for Douglas Aircraft. Imagine this contrast. Harry Thaw spent his life on destruction and consumption, sitting in an easy chair with cocaine. His son, Russell, rose into the sky every day, pushing the boundaries of the possible, serving progress. If there is karmic justice in this story, it lies in Russell. The rotten Thaw blood was purified through a generation. The gilding peeled off, revealing the true steel of character that Harry himself so lacked. This story is a mirror that we are afraid to look into. It shows us that the Gilded Age hasn't gone anywhere. We've just changed the scenery. Instead of lobster restaurants, we have exclusive VIP clubs. Instead of newspaper reporters, paparazzi and bloggers. Instead of the diagnosis American madness, we have the term affluenza, the defense for rich teenagers who kill people with cars and avoid prison because they are too wealthy to understand the consequences. Harry Thor's lawyers created a precedent. If you have enough money, you can buy yourself a new reality in which murder is a feat. We began this story with a shot on the roof. We end it with silence. But in this silence sounds a warning. Wealth without morality is cancer that devours its host. The Thor Empire, which seemed eternal, crumbled to dust in one generation. $40 million, equivalent to $1 billion today, could not buy a gram of happiness or a minute of peace. When you walk through New York and see majestic buildings with columns, remember Stanford White. Remember that behind these facades hid debts and vices. And when you see the next scandalous star in the news, remember Evelyn Nesbit. History does not repeat itself, it rhymes. And one last thing. On that evening when the shots rang out, the orchestra played the song, "I Could Love a Million Girls." Harry Thor thought he was putting a period at the end of the musical. In reality, he just turned off the lights in the hall. The show, called The American Dream, continued. But from that moment, we all know what happens behind the scenes. Gold on the facade always hides cracks in the foundation. And sometimes, to see the truth, everything needs to collapse.